Not one single child comes out of childhood without some level of trauma. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. That's just the reality of it. However, there is such a thing as not excessively fucking your child up, right? This is probably going to be a multi video series because there's a lot to cover here, and this is honestly like such a big subject, right? I'm going to utilize a few different things in this video and probably even in the next videos to come on this subject. Um, Specifically in this case, Freudian psychology, psychoanalytic theory. Um, it's going to be a very helpful structure to examine to understand what all of this stuff means and how to navigate. So, ego development is one of the most important things to look at when it comes to raising a child and the difference between an excessively fucked up ego state in a child and a less damaged ego state, right? Again, no child comes out of childhood without some level of trauma, right? And there's also no such thing as a perfect parent, right? Um, but the reality of it is it's possible to not excessively fuck up your child or your children. That's just the reality of it. And so I'm going to utilize Freudian's psychoanalytic theory, Freudian psychology's psychoanalytic theory for this, which consists of the id, which is the very first entity that is born in any individual in infancy, the ego, right, and the superego. We're not going to so much touch on the superego, quite possibly in this first one. We might touch a bit more on it. I might be wrong about that, but we're going to be focusing mainly on the id and the ego, right? Um, and it's fascinating too because I understand that this video might cause some level of backlash, pushback, controversy, whatever it is. Um, but the reality of it is that it is possible to not excessively fuck up your child, specifically if you understand all of these dynamics and how this stuff works, right? Um, so first, I'm going to look at what it is that I call the healthy triad of healthier childhoods, right? Children that are not raised in survival. Um, the healthy triad is healthy boundaries from a very early age, individuation, and differentiation. If you can allow your children to have these three structures, they're going to end up with less ego damage than children that don't get those, right? So let's first look at Freudian psychology and Freud's psychoanalytic theory, right? You've got the id, you've got the ego, you've got the superego. The id is the first entity that is born in any individual, right? It is the life or death, which is fascinating because it consists of the all or nothing dynamic, right? You look at an infant and you see how pretty much like instant gratification, um, kind of, I mean, it goes on par with the whole life or death dynamic, right? Um, Infants are usually destructive, right? And that's because of the id. The id is somewhat of a beast inside of this little infant, right? It is entirely survival based. It is entirely needs based, um, and it is entirely seeing everything in an all or nothing standpoint, right? Um, and it's fascinating too because people with emotional immaturity, they tend to be quite often stagnated in infancy for whatever reason, right? Well, not really whatever reason. It usually has to do with whatever traumatized them in that stage of life. Um, but let's look specifically at the ego state, right? And this is why I was referencing the necessary and healthy triad of childhood: the healthy boundaries, the individuation, and the differentiation. So the healthy boundaries, where I begin and where I end, who I am and who I'm not, what I am responsible for and what I'm not responsible for, right? Um, Healthy boundaries also have a lot to do with identity, right? The identity of Chris consists of boundaries, right? Who Chris is, who Chris isn't, right? Um, let's look at individuation. Individuation is really just the process of consciously becoming an individual, right? Having your own independent thoughts, opinions, ideas, emotions, um, what you do, right? Individuation is important because it separates you in a very healthy way from your family of origin. That's just the reality of it, right? Differentiation has a lot more to do with um, like actually becoming your own self, right? Differentiation. How do you differentiate yourself from other people? Um, this is your shit, or I should say, this is my shit. This is your shit, or this is my shit. That's your shit, right? That has a lot to do. That has a lot more to do with differentiation. Now, the fascinating thing about the contrast of the healthy triad, healthy boundaries, individuation, differentiation, is usually that the opposite of that ends up being something like enmeshment, right? Where the family system consists of diffused boundaries and everyone's shit is everyone's shit, and that's just not healthy. Um, so when it comes to Freud's psychoanalytic theory, right? Um, in healthier or even healthiest childhoods, the child, whenever they communicate a boundary, right, the parent respects that boundary, right? And then that further helps to the growing of the identity for the child from a very early age, right? Children communicate boundaries. Toddlers communicate boundaries. They do. Whenever you hear them say no, right? That's them telling you stop, or I don't want to do that, right? Now, where a lot of parents go in the unhealthy direction is that they push past that boundary that their child is setting. And then that's where the boundary violations start to take place. Now, I understand that this is probably where the backlash comes into play. And maybe somebody might say, but Chris, I don't want them to do that, or I don't want them to be that way. Okay, hold on a second. Let me break this down real quick. Your child is not a narcissistic extension of you. Your child is not there to fill the void of your fucked up insecurities. They are not. It is quite likely that you're trying to make them into that. It is quite likely that you're trying to turn them into a narcissistic extension of you and to get them to not be somebody that they're trying to be and instead drill into them this thing that they're not. Right? Why do you want to have kids? Why do you have kids? What is the point of you having kids? Are you having kids because your parents told you that you're supposed to? Are you having kids because you learned that you were just supposed to for some reason? Why do you have kids? Why did you have kids? Why do you want to have kids? Right? It's really important to understand that children, in the healthiest sense, are not a narcissistic extension of you. But it's also quite possible that you've learned to believe that children are actually there to fill voids of insecurity inside of you, right? Which is why you're actually far more controlling of them and trying to be very critical and precise about the direction that they take in life, right? What college they go to, who they marry, this, that, and the other. Which a lot of parents don't want to hear it, but that's none of your fucking business. What college they go to, what they do, who they fucking marry. If you're trying to control that, you're violating their boundaries. right? So when little Tommy tries to communicate, no, I don't want to do this, that, and the other. If you disrespect that and you say, well, you're gonna fucking do it because I'm your fucking parent and I know what's best for you, you're gonna fucking fuck up your child. And that's just the reality of it, right? Your little boy or girl is trying to communicate their boundary, whatever it is that they are not comfortable with, or whatever it is that they are comfortable with, right? And if you try to push past that, you're going to fuck up your child, right? And I'm not here to argue about, like, oh, you're too sensitive, oh, you're being soft. No, it has nothing to do with any of that stuff. Listen, children, in what it is that they are going to become and what it is that they're going to do, I guess you could say it's a fucking wild card. A lot of parents try to control that. Yes, absolutely. A lot of parents try to control that. But what a child becomes is more so a wild card. You can't predict that. You don't know, right? If you're concerned that your child is going to turn out with a sexuality that you don't like, you can't control that. You can't. You need to understand that if you're having children, all that you have control of, which is honestly one of the most important things, is healthy boundaries, individuation, and differentiation. Right? That's the reality of it. For the sake of time, I'm going to take this to around 15 minutes because I have a little bit more to talk about in the first video. Right? This is going to be a video series of a few different videos. But the reality of it is that I'm going to expand more on this idea that I'm going to talk about here in the next videos, but I'm going to establish it here. It is possible to not excessively fuck up your children or your child, right? The most important thing, or I should say things in this case of the healthy triad, is that you can establish from a very early age healthy boundaries, individuation, and differentiation. The healthiest individuals out there are actually individuals. They are independent, right? They are not glued into a fucked up system of enmeshment where boundaries are diffused. They don't even know who the fuck they are. They don't even know what the fuck their emotions are separate from other people's emotions. They're so sucked into these fucked up and unhealthy dysfunctional dynamics of enmeshment, right? They didn't get healthy boundaries because if they did, they wouldn't have been a part of the enmeshed system. They didn't get individuation because if they did, they wouldn't be feeling so overly responsible for other people and their lives. They didn't get the healthy differentiation because if they did, right, they'd know the difference between self and other, my shit, your shit. That's just the reality, right? This model is no fucking joke. This model of Freud's psychoanalytic theory, this model of the healthy triad of healthy boundaries, individuation, and differentiation are no fucking joke. Um, there's probably research out there that shows the difference between healthy individuals that had less trauma in childhood and exceedingly unhealthy individuals that did not get any of those healthy boundaries, individuation, or differentiation, right? There are models and there is proof that this is the reality of it, right? Now, the other reality of it is that if you are not a healthy individual, you are not going to raise a healthy child. If you did not get healthy boundaries, if you were raised in survival, I'll talk more about survival in the next video. But if you were raised in survival, you did not get healthy boundaries, individuation, and differentiation, and you also did not do the work on yourself in a professional, licensed environment with a licensed professional, and you did not do any work to heal or anything like that, the likelihood that you're just going to raise another you with all of your fucked upness, you're not a bad person. It's not right or wrong or good or bad. It's just not healthy. And it leads to the passing down of more of the same bullshit, right? If that's the way that you are and you're not doing anything to change that and you're not going to do anything to change that, you are absolutely going to fuck up your child. That's just the reality of it. So let me make this very clear, if I didn't already. No child comes out of childhood without some level of trauma. That's just the reality of it, right? But there is the difference between, and even those children hopefully and usually end up going to therapy to heal and mend the little cracks that have taken place, right? But even though no child comes out of childhood without some level of trauma, it is possible to make sure that a child does not get exceedingly fucked up by their already fucked up parent, right? It's not going to happen unless the parent goes through therapy before they decide to have children. That's the reality of it. So understanding that is absolutely crucial. Um, but yeah, so just to recap, we focused on Freudian psychology, psychoanalytic theory, id, ego, superego. I'll explore more of that in the next video, as well as children that are raised in survival and how that fucks them up, and children that are raised in healthier or even the healthiest environments. Because there is a fucking difference. This is the last thing I'll say in this video before I end off. There is a difference between a child that is raised in survival, in a family system of enmeshment, and a child that is raised in a healthier or the healthiest family system where healthy boundaries are set in place from a very early age. Individuation takes place and differentiation takes place. There is a massive and clear difference. It doesn't mean that that healthier child is not going to need therapy. Yeah, even some of the healthier or healthiest people need therapy. That's just the reality of it. And I am an advocate for therapy, by the way. Absolutely. This is not sponsored by any um, program out there or any therapy program out there. This is just the reality that, yeah, therapy is beneficial, period. Um, so, yeah, with that, this is going to be a multi video series, and that's it for this one. Psychoanalytic theory, id, ego, superego. Next one is going to be enmeshment, survival, and just really the contrast, because the contrast is what's most important here. It will help people understand the difference, right, between a healthy versus an exceedingly there's no perfect childhood. There isn't, period. There's no perfect people. Doesn't exist. But there is the difference between um a healthy or healthier or healthiest childhood and an exceedingly absurdly dysfunctional fucked up childhood. That's just the reality of it.